The conference room lights were unforgiving, flattening every face into something sharp. My dad spoke first, his voice steady enough to hurt. "You're suspended until you apologize to your sister." A pen stopped mid-stroke. My sister tilted her head, pretending to look offended, but the small smirk she tried to hide said everything. I stood in front of my frozen slide deck, thumb pressing the remote until it clicked. No one spoke. No one stepped in. No one even breathed differently. I didn't argue. I didn't flinch. I just said, "All right." If my dad had known what that word would unleash, he might have stayed silent. I grew up in a house where silence was supposed to mean harmony. It took me years to understand it actually meant hierarchy. My sister learned that early. She cried once during a school project disagreement, and my dad stepped in before the teacher could even finish explaining the situation. She left with a new set of supplies and a pat on the head. I left with the same poster board and the reminder to be the reasonable one. Reasonable became my role before I knew I'd accepted it. I remember the afternoon the acceptance letter arrived. A thick envelope. My name printed clean and centered. I held it with both hands on the kitchen tile, feeling the weight of a future I had earned. My dad skimmed the first line, nodded once, and set it down beside the mail pile like it was a reminder for a dentist appointment. He didn't even open the second page. My sister walked in 10 minutes later with an engagement ring, and suddenly the house filled with champagne glasses and phone calls. My letter disappeared beneath a stack of party napkins before the night was over. That was the first time I realized accomplishment meant less than spectacle. After my mom passed, the imbalance sharpened. She had been the quiet buffer, the one who noticed when my shoulders tensed or when I stayed up too late finishing assignments. When the house lost her softness, it also lost the only person who kept my dad's blind spot from swallowing the rest of us. My sister didn't change. She simply had less resistance. In the family business, the pattern repeated itself with cleaner lines and higher stakes. I built the development department from a small room with flickering lights into a floor full of engineers who trusted me. I knew every detail, every timeline we delivered, every feature we'd shipped, every system we'd rebuilt. I didn't brag. I didn't need to. My sister, on the other hand, mastered the art of promising things she didn't understand. 4-week timelines when the work required 12, budgets that didn't account for testing infrastructure or staff burnout. My dad always backed her. "She knows the clients did. Just make it work." So we did. Nights blurred into mornings. My team stayed late, eyes strained under the blue glow of screens. I stayed later, smoothing out the gaps, rewriting schedules, absorbing blame she handed off with a flawless smile. My dad never asked how we managed. He only repeated what he'd always said: "Your sister handles relationships. You handle the rest." I didn't argue. I documented everything. It became my quiet language: timelines, notes, risk logs, written evidence no one wanted to read. The last project before the suspension told me what I had refused to admit. My sister made another impossible promise. My dad approved it before I even saw the email. When I pointed out the numbers didn't add up, he looked at me the same way he did when I was a child asking for fairness. Patient, dismissive, certain I would adjust myself to fit whatever shape he needed. Standing in the hallway outside that meeting room, I realized something simple and sharp. I had spent a lifetime being reasonable for people who never intended to see me at all. That was the day I learned my place in this family and the day I quietly began to leave it. The hallway outside the conference room felt colder than it should have. People stepped aside when I walked through, but not out of respect, discomfort, like standing too close to me might pull them into the blast radios of a family decision no one wanted to acknowledge. No one said my name. No one met my eyes. I reached my floor and printed memo taped beside the elevators: a new project chart, a new chain of command. My sister's name sat cleanly at the top of a column I had built from nothing. Her title bold. Mine missing an oversight. It was a rewrite. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from one of my engineers: "Are you okay?" Another: "Do we still follow your timeline?" Thing: "They're saying a lot upstairs." I turned the screen face down on my desk and let it vibrate silently. My dad called a few minutes later. He didn't ask how I felt. He asked if I understood the optics. His voice carried the same tone he used when I was 12, and he tried to explain why my sister got the last slice of cake. "Just keep the peace," he said. "Family comes first." A family. The word felt oddly weightless in his mouth. When I hung up, my sister was already waiting in the doorway. She didn't knock. She leaned against the frame like she owned the room because my dad had made sure she did. "You can end this," she said, soft enough to sound gracious. "Just apologize." She brushed a piece of lint from her sleeve, checked her reflection in the dark edge of my monitor, and smiled at herself. Small, confident, certain she'd won. I watched her smirk the same way I had watched it my entire life, a curve that meant she didn't expect consequences. Not now, not ever. I didn't answer. I didn't even look directly at her. I just felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not grief, something steadier like a door clicking shut. She waited, expecting a fight she could perform her way out of. Instead, I picked up my portfolio, closed the laptop, and stood it. She asked. I nodded once. Then I said the only word she never saw coming, all right. I closed the door to my office and let the latch click into place. The sound was small, almost polite, but it marked a line I had never crossed before. The room felt unfamiliar now, as if I were seeing it from the outside in the glass walls, the framed degrees, the soft hum of machines. My team trusted me to keep running. Everything I had built, arranged, protected. Everything taken for granted. I slipped the hair tie from my wrist and pulled my hair back, the familiar motion steadying me. Then I opened the top drawer and began. The first things I packed were the documents I never let anyone else handle: project scopes, risk assessments, notes from meetings no one remembered I attended, payment records, bills, budget breakdowns, timelines scribbled at midnight in my kitchen with a mug of cooling coffee beside me. I lined each folder in a neat row on my desk, checking dates, matching signatures, moving with the calm precision I used when debugging code. No rush, no panic, just truth. I wrapped my degrees in tissue paper, next sliding each frame into a box. Every award followed. Proof of work my dad never acknowledged, but the company couldn't deny. The walls grew blank, colder, like they were preparing themselves for the next person who would stand here pretending to know what this job required. My laptop chimed. Messages kept coming from my team, from other departments, from people who had sat through the meeting and pretended not to see what happened. I turned the laptop face down. Silence was cleaner. I opened a new document, not to analyze, not to defend, but to finalizing. A resignation letter, short and quiet. No emotion, no accusations, just the formal severing of a role I had already outgrown. Then came the real work. I opened the shared drive and began compiling the evidence no one had asked for, but everyone needing: project histories, resource allocations, contract notes. Every instance where my sister had made promises without checking a single technical constraint. I didn't adjust the tone. I didn't add commentary. I only collected what already existed. 2 hours passed like a long exhale. By the time the file was complete, it wasn't a case. It was a mirror. My fingers hovered over the send button, not out of doubt, but precision. Timing mattered. A quiet plan doesn't shout, it lands. I sent it to the board, the department heads, the clients whose expectations had been distorted. A single subject line: project documentation and status overview. No drama, just information. My phone rang within 60 seconds. The company lawyer first, then a board member, then 2 clients, all unanswered. I moved through the room again, collecting pens, notebooks, the mug my team had given me last winter. The one thing I left on the shelf was a prototype from a project we'd saved 3 years ago. 40 hours of work in 2 days, enough coffee to last a month, and a sense of unity no executive ever noticed. I set it back upright, brushed off the dust, and let it stay. My sister appeared in the doorway again, this time breathless. What did you do? Her voice echoed faintly against the glass. She looked around the half-packed office, eyes darting from the empty wall to the open boxes. You didn't tell me you didn't. I didn't answer. I placed the last folder in my portfolio and closed it with a quiet click. She stepped inside as if crossing a border without permission. You can't leave. Dad won't allow it. You're making a mistake. I slid my laptop into its sleeve. No, I said. I'm correcting one. Her mouth opened, ready to argue, to perform, to twist the narrative into something where she remained the hero. But she stopped when she saw my desk completely cleared. The space that used to hold my work, my hours, my presence was now empty. For a moment, she was silent. I walked past her without waiting for permission. The hallway outside smelled faintly of copier ink and burnt coffee, the same scent that had followed me for years. Each step felt deliberate, grounded, cleaner than any victory. By the time I reached the elevator, I had already booked a meeting with my lawyer. A message from a recruiter blinked on my lock screen. An opportunity I had once declined out of loyalty. I swiped it open, and responded and accepted. My dad called again. His voice filled the voicemail with urgency. We need to talk. Do not do anything rash. But the plan was already done, and nothing about it was rash. I returned home just as the evening light slid across my living room. The house was quiet, warm, mine. I set the portfolio on the dining table, opened it, and arranged the documents in clean stacks. The order was soothing, the truth undeniable. One stack for contracts, one for payments, for timelines, one for emails, one final folder that held the resignation letter waiting for a signature. I took a slow breath, pressed the pen to the page, and signed my name with a steady hand. I gathered everything into the portfolio, closed it gently, and ran my fingers along the leather edge. A ritual sealing something irreversible. In the silence that followed, nothing felt chaotic. Nothing felt wrong. There was just clarity. For the first time in years, I wasn't preparing to fix anything. I was preparing to walk away. This time I wouldn't fix what they had broken. I arrived at the office just before 9. The lobby was louder than usual. Whispers tucked behind coffee lids, glances that skittered away when I looked up. Someone held the elevator for me, then pretended they hadn't when I stepped inside. The executive floor felt tighter, as if the air hadn't fully settled since yesterday. My dad's assistant stood near the doorway, clutching a folder to her chest. "He wants to see you," she said, but the tremor in her voice told me the request wasn't really his. I didn't answer. I walked straight to the conference room. The door was already open. My dad stood at the far end of the table, shoulders stiff, eyes red-rimmed from a night spent trying to contain what be contained. The company lawyer sat beside him, laptop open, face pale. A paralegal typed quietly in the corner, recording everything. My sister hovered near the window, arms crossed, expression pinched like she had chewed something sour. No one spoke until I took my seat. My dad tried first. "We can work this, Ad." His voice strained for authority. "Let's be rational." I set the portfolio on the table. The soft thud sliced through the room. "I'm here to finalize my resignation," I said. The lawyer inhaled short. My sister blinked. The first crack in her confidence. My dad's jaw tightened. "You don't need to do this," he said. I opened the portfolio, lifted the resignation letter, and laid it gently on the table like placing a card in a game that had already ended. "Suspension without documented cause triggers severance terms," I said. "Section 12 covers immediate vesting." The lawyer had already read my contract. He nodded once, confirming it. My dad blinked slowly, suppressing the realization that he had approved every clause himself 4 years ago. My sister stepped forward. "This is ridiculous. You're blowing everything out of proportion. All you had to do was apologize." I slid a second folder across the table, the documentation from last night. Timelines, contracts, payments, bills, email chains. Everything clean, everything factual, everything she had pretended didn't exist. But the lawyer hesitated before opening it. When he did, his face drained even further. "This is extensive," he whispered. My sister leaned over his shoulder, eyes widening with every page. "You can't send this to clients. They'll think I already sent it," I said. Her hand froze midair. "What?" My dad's voice cracked. "I sent documentation to the board and to the project stakeholders. Status updates, accuracy matters." The room dropped into a hollow silence. My sister looked at my dad, desperate for rescue. "Dad, say something." But he wasn't looking at her. He was staring at the stack of documents, the mirror he had spent years refusing to face. "You blindsided us," he said quietly. "No," I replied. "I revealed what you ignored." The lawyer cleared his throat. "Legally, she acted within her rights. Nothing she shared violates confidentiality. These are internal project documents and the contract terms are binding." My sister's voice rose. "So she gets to walk away after ruining everything." I closed the portfolio. I didn't ruin anything. I stopped absorbing the cost. My dad pressed his palms flat against the table. "We need you for the Hamilton account. We can't deliver what your sister promised. She didn't understand the requirements." He stopped, catching himself too late. My sister turned toward him, stunned. "You're blaming me." He looked at her the way people look at burning buildings, realizing too late they should have checked the foundation. I stood. "This isn't my problem anymore," I said. "I've accepted another position." My sister let out a hollow laugh, sharp and brittle. "Who would hire you after this?" The lawyer closed the folder with trembling fingers. "Anyone who values competence." For a moment, no one breathed. I reached for the portfolio. My dad stepped forward as if to stop me, then dropped his hand halfway. "We can still fix this," he said softly. "You don't have to leave." I met his eyes finally, level, finally clear. I already left. I walked out of the conference room, past my sister's stunned silence, past the lawyer's pale shock, past my dad's dying smile. I didn't look back. The elevator doors slid shut with a muted hum. And just like that, the entire system I'd once tried to hold together began to collapse without me lifting a finger. I left the building without checking if anyone watched. The air outside felt different, lighter, somehow, as if the weight I'd carried for years had finally realized it no longer had a host. The city noise blurred into a home. My footsteps sounded steady on the pavement. At home, the light through the living room windows was warm, softening the edges of everything it touched. I set my portfolio on the dining table, not with finality, but with a quiet sense of completion. The space felt untouched by the chaos of the last 2 days. A place that hadn't taken anything from me, a place that didn't demand proof. I fed Cooper, my dog, and he trotted across the hardwood floor, nails tapping lightly, ordinary, grounding. I poured a glass of water and held it with both hands the way I held coffee in the mornings at the office. The gesture surprised me. A habit carried from a life I no longer owed anything to. That night, I didn't check emails. I didn't replay conversations. I didn't anticipate fallout. The quiet wasn't heavy for once. It was clean. In the morning, I dressed without rushing, choosing clothes that didn't need to communicate authority to anyone. On the drive to my meeting with the new company, the skyline looked almost unfamiliar, like a place I was seeing for the first time rather than escaping from. Their office was bright, open, filled with the easy sound of people who didn't tiptoe around tension. When the hiring manager introduced me to the team, no one evaluated my presence against someone else's status. They just shook my hand and smiled. Later, standing near a wall of windows overlooking the city, I thought of the acceptance letter buried under engagement party napkins, the late night spent fixing impossible timelines, the countless moments I stayed silent, because silence was expected, and then I thought of the empty desk, the resignation letter, the portfolio placed on the table without drama. Each act simple, precise mine. Leaving wasn't a loss. It was an opening, one I had created with nothing more than facts, restraint, and a willingness to stop rescuing people who confused my competence for obligation. For the first time in years, the quiet didn't feel like an eraser. It felt like freedom in the end. I learned something silence isn't surrender. It's a doorway, a place where you choose what enters and what never will again. Walking away didn't break me. It returned me to myself. If you've ever stood in a room where your worth was treated like background noise, let this story remind you, your life doesn't need their permission to change. Thank you for listening. If you want more stories like this, stay close. There's more to tell.